Special Ed Cooperatives. I'm Doug Edwards, Director of CHAMP. Kim Myers from Franklin Jeff back there. I don't think we have anybody. At any rate, I want to turn things over to Jessica Adair with ISBE for training on the DLM. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let me know if this echoes because I could hear myself echoing between the two. You can't hear anything again. So we're going to record this so that we can post it because we know that we were full. So if you have questions throughout the training, please make sure that you don't use student names, things like that, that will be recorded and posted on the websites for everyone in the state to view. Like you said, I'm Jessica Adair. I work in our assessment division, and I've mainly been the DLM coordinator, but over the last couple years, I've been assisting all state assessments when it's regards to students with disabilities, as my background has always been special ed. But I also have with me today is Laura Quimby. She's from our special ed division. She's also been assisting with both PARCC and DLM. And so there's a part in the presentation that we're going to hand it over to her to talk about that side of it. So everyone should have received a handout, a couple handouts. The first one that we're going to go through is the PowerPoint. The other one's just some supplemental materials that we'll reference for you to actually go back through and read later. But we do ask, as we're giving the presentation, if you have questions, ask then, because we find that this is a lot of information and it's new information, so it's best to clarify it why we're talking about it. So as we get started, we're talking about the DLM. So the DLM is what's replacing the IAA, so it's our alternate assessment. But we'd like to always remind people about the regulations. So you've got Title I and the IDEA and Section 504 that just states that all students, regardless if they have a disability or not, should be a part of your accountability system. So because they're a part of your accountability system, the way they are tested is based off the state standards. So it's just a reminder that all students should have access to the standards as part of their curriculum. So the student population is the same population of students that took the IA. It's students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. So the DLM has a participation guidelines. It looks very similar to the IA guidelines. We do have this posted on the DLM websites, and we'll show you those sites towards the end of the presentation. But if you use the IA guidelines this year to make that determination, that's fine, because the criteria is very similar. Because DLM and PARCC are a consortia, it's not just our state that is creating the assessment. So some of the terminology just has changed, but the criteria is very similar. So just going forward, you would want to use this participation guidelines to use to determine that eligibility for DLM. If you've never used the guidelines, it is a requirement that you use to determine if a student's eligible to take the DLM instead of the Gen Ed assessment. And this year it'll be the PARCC assessment. So you just want to start using those guidelines on a yearly basis for any student that you feel may be eligible for DLM. So we're going to talk about the DLM system, and this is the diagram that DLM has presented. Let me know if I get in your guys' way over here. And so we're going to refer to this a couple times, and basically the system itself, each piece is embedded within the next piece. And so we're going to start from the outer ring and work our way down. And so the big part is the learning map. And so the DLM system was all based off of these learning maps, and this is just a little portion of a learning map. So DLM has a learning map for ELA, and they have a learning map for math. And within this learning map, you can see a bunch of boxes and a bunch of lines. And so when you look at that, you can see how the lines and boxes intersect. And basically what this is showing you multiple pathways that students can learn and work towards the development of the academic knowledge and different understandings and skills. They have something that they call nodes that just represent that specific knowledge. So when we talk about skills or foundational skills related to ELA and math, each of those boxes have some type of content in them, and they interrelate because you have to work on certain skills in a progression in order to get to the standards or the essential elements. And so that just features multiple pathways, because we also know that students, regardless if they're students with disabilities or not, learn in different ways. And so these learning maps capture that student's progression, their process of how they learn those different skills, and you can map it on that learning map. And like I said, we have it for both ELA and math, and they're aligned to the Common Core EEs. So what we call the EEs are the essential elements. We'll go into a little bit more detail here in a second on what those are, but those are the standards that align directly back to the Common Core for this population. We do have those documents posted. They are K-12, so we have them for all grade levels. So if you haven't seen them, we'll show you where to get those, but those are the ones that you would want to start using for the students that would qualify for DLM. So after you have the entire learning standards and the learning map all built within, so you can see those pathways, DLM came up with claims and conceptual areas. Now you may have heard something similar of claims with PARC. Basically both tests are claiming what students should be able to do, and the test is going to be able to provide that information. So when we take a look at claims and conceptual areas, we have a set for ELA and a set for math. So when we look at the ELA ones, this is for, right now they apply it for 3 through 12 because that's what the assessment system is built on. And in the future they're looking at K2, but for right now we're going to reference that this is for 3 through 12. And so they have major claims about when students test in the system, this is the information that we can claim based off of what we're able to measure. So students can comprehend text in increasingly complex ways. Students can produce writing for a range of purposes and audiences. Students can communicate for a range of purposes and audiences. And students can investigate topics and present information. So when we take a look at these claims, at each grade level, the essential elements and the tasks that are written are embedded within a claim. They fit somewhere in there. So as a whole, we can look at these and say we can measure, are students able to comprehend text in increasingly complex ways through those different items and things that they're doing. But when we talk about students producing writing, it's the way the student produces writing. It doesn't necessarily mean that the student's picking up a pencil and doing real writing. It's their real writing in their form. And so you may find that that student does writing through the teacher, where they might have a system where they're picking the letters and the teacher does the real writing. We have a video out there. His name is Hunter. He's a grade 4 student. And you can see him going through a writing activity. And his writing is going through the teacher. The teacher's the one that's actually doing the writing for him. And he's telling the teacher what letters to write as she does it. And so that's his form of writing. So when we talk about communicating and writing, it's all in the student's mode of communication. And then from there you have your concepts that kind of break it down into more detailed when it comes to those ELA and math skills. And so some of these are like looking at the determining critical elements of text or understanding of the text, creating ideas, using language to communicate about those ideas, looking at different sources for information, and collaborating. So many of these I always look at and have compared to what we had was called the IA frameworks, and you can see that a bunch of those framework priorities align somewhere within these major claims and concepts. It was just that we never had any claims that we put forth with the IA assessment. Now we have this also for mathematics. So mathematics is set up the same way. It's for 3 through 12. And by testing in the system, we're able to measure. And so DLM is making the claim that students will be able to demonstrate increasingly complex understanding of number sense, solve increasingly complex mathematical problems, and making productive use of your algebra functions. Students can demonstrate increasingly complex spatial reasoning and understanding of geometric principles, and that students can demonstrate increasingly complex understanding of measurement, data, and analytic procedures. So all these are derived out of those essential elements, those standards, what's important for these students to be able to do, and at their grade levels, here's what we're able to measure. And then from there you have the concepts, and some of these break it down into smaller skills like the counting, the place value, and fraction. Measurement, looking at data displays and things like that. Things that we've seen in the past on our IAA items. You can see how they embed within. So the next piece, now that you've got the learning map and you see how all the skills are related together and how they link, you have what we're claiming we are able to measure with those conceptual areas. Now they break it down to the actual standard, those EEs and what they call other nodes, the foundation. So when we take a look at the essential elements, basically these were created to build a bridge to what's called the new Illinois Learning Standards, incorporating the Common Core in ELA and mathematics. So those are the standards that were the Common Core, is how we referred them when we adopted them in 2010. They've replaced the Illinois Learning Standards for ELA and Math because the Common Core is only in ELA and Math. So the essential elements were built to build a bridge between that Common Core standards and what is necessary for these students to learn and understand and what's essential at each of those grade levels. So it's specific statements by grade level of what content, academic expectations we have for the student population. So the EEs, they're just reduced in depth, breadth, and complexity. They provide appropriate level of rigor and challenge for these students though, and they focus on those skills, but if you could see in that learning map, you have multiple pathways that students can take to learn those skills. So it's really individualized on how students may learn them. But it also gives us that starting point of determining achievement targets for these students. You know, in the past, all we had was that standard. Now with the DLM system and the essential elements, we can see achievement targets and their progression as they go through that learning map, what those next skills could be. But we always like to make note that they're not functional or pre-K skills. And they're not instructional descriptions. They're not your curriculum, and they're not just your learning progressions. You know, it's the standards. Your curriculum is what you use in the classroom that aligns to the standards, and that you shouldn't just restate them as your goals or your benchmarks. Okay, you align them to your goals and benchmarks. You use the standards to align them, but you just don't restate the EEs as those benchmarks. And that they're not separate from our grade level college and career readiness standards. They build that bridge between that entire content standard and what's appropriate and expected for this population. So we're going to take a look at what that looks like. So each document is a little over 200 pages. But it goes K-12, and what it shows is on the left side it shows you that Common Core standard, and then on the right side it shows you that essential element. So you can see that direct link of how that essential piece of that standard came out. So this is just an example of an ELA alignment. So it's RL 6.2 here on the left is that Common Core standard. So RL is reading for lit. Grade 6, standard 2. So that's how ELA is set up. It tells you the category, the grade, and then the standard number. So RL 6.2. And it talks about determining a theme and central idea through details and providing a summary of text and things like that. From there, they felt what was essential for this grade 6 student was to be able to determine the theme or central idea of a familiar story and identify details within that familiar story. So you can see how it has that direct align. So we kept the numbering the same. They've just added EE in front. So it's EE RL 6.2. So even if you didn't have that full 200-page document, you'd be able to go back and see how it directly relates to that Common Core because that numbering is the same. Now here's a math alignment. So math set theirs up, Common Core just a little bit different. So it's 4 MD5. So in math, it's the grade level first. So this is grade 4. Then the category is measurement and data, and then the standard is 5. So we've kept that same alignment as we did the structuring. So it's EE 4 MD5. And the Common Core standard talked about recognizing angles as geometric shapes. It talked about rays with endpoints, and this one goes on and on and on. This is just a part of that standard. But what was essential out of that was for students to recognize angles and geometric shapes. So that became that essential element, but you can see how it directly relates back. Is there anyone who hasn't seen the Common Core standards with the EEs? Good, so this is familiar to you. So what we found though in mathematics as you get to the upper grades, that what they would have pulled from that Common Core standard, that essential piece would overlap some of the other Common Core standards. So you might find where you'd have a standard that would say AMD 4-6. That meant it's covering the Common Core standard 4, 5, and 6, but you still have that direct alignment in that chart. Do you guys have any questions yet? Okay. So the next piece of the essential elements is what they call the nodes, and it's really kind of more of those foundational skills that students need to learn regardless if they have a disability or not. It's those content foundational skills that students need to know prior to learning any other content. It's that basis. And so within this conceptual areas and linked directly to those EEs are foundational skills, but then they also have some nodes that go beyond that EE. So they're working on their way towards that full Common Core standard, but they're just one step past that target is what they call it. That target is the EE, but they have a level that goes just beyond. Because we may have some students that do hit that EE, and you want to continue to instruct on that, and you need to know what that next level is, and so we're able to show you that. So if we took a closer look at that learning map, this is what you get. Now you can start to see those boxes come a little bit more clear. You still can't see the writing in it, but if we blew it up, you'd see that there's actually content, skills, and understandings written in there. The blue ones are the EEs, and the white boxes represent other skills and understandings or foundational skills that students would need to know along the pathway as they work towards those EEs. And so this one you can see how, you know, one student's pathway may go one way to the same EE and another student's pathway goes a different way, but they're all linked back to that same EE. It just depends on that student's pathway of learning, which skills they're doing in the map. Now they tell us if we blew these up to the size that they really are, they're like the size of a whale. So it's running K-12, they're enormous. And so we just always have these smaller shots, but what they've informed us is in the future they're working on that you'd be able to get a printout and highlight specifically and be able to read it, that path that your student took. So you'd be able to see within here if your student took this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this way, and then your other student went this way. You'd be able to identify specifically where those students went in that pathway so you could look at those specific skills. So that's the system. So the system is made up of all those pieces, and when it's built and put together, that's how the assessments are delivered. So from there, there's multiple types of assessments, and we're going to go over each one. DLM also has a couple models that states can use for accountability, so we're going to talk about that. So the first couple we're going to talk about are optional. So the first one is called instructionally embedded assessments. It is available for students in grades 3 through 12. Okay, so it's a little different than what we've always used our accountability tests for. So the DLM system was set up not to just be used for accountability. It's there for a formative type piece of information for teachers that they can get feedback immediately from testing to use it for instructional purposes. And that's what these instructionally embedded tests are for. So because we're a DLM state and other states have other grade levels that they test for accountability, we're able to make it available 3 through 12. Using the DLM system with these assessments, you can make it unique to each student. And when you make it unique to each student, the teacher chooses which EEs that student's going to assess on based off of what you're doing in the classroom. So if you're instructing on a couple math EEs and now you're ready to get a level and some data back on where that student is and you want a measurement type thing, you would go in and tell the system, I want to assess the student on these 2 EEs. And then after they test, you get that formative information that you could go back and apply it to your instructional and say, okay, that student's ready to move on these skills, or I need to wait and instruct on these skills because clearly that student just hasn't grasped that yet. So it's here as a formative tool.
Can you walk us through an example of that?
I'm going to show you an example of the different levels in the system. So you could see the levels and how it would apply. But when you go through the actual required training that DLM has, they do walk you through some specific examples there. So the tests are delivered not just at the specific EEs that you choose, but it's also delivered at the student's unique abilities and at their needs. Because the system is dynamic, it's able to capture that student's ability level and deliver an assessment that's unique to them. So no 2 assessments are going to be the same. So our hats of thinking with IAA that every grade 4 student got the test booklet and all the operational items were the same. That is not going to be the same with DLM. The test is unique to that student based on their unique needs and ability level and at their grade level and which level they enter the assessment. So the instructionally embedded, you get to choose what tests they're taking if you use it for instructional. Because why would you want a student to test something they've not been taught yet? So that's why you get to make it unique for you. But it provides you that information to assist in planning. And there'll be reports that as soon as they get done testing, these reports will be delivered into the system and you can print them at that point and you could see that data immediately. Okay, so it's not like just the IA where you have to wait till that next school year to get the data. When you use these tests, you get that data right away so that you can use it in your classroom. Okay, so the other piece in the system, now all tests are delivered in the same way. So once you know the system, it doesn't make a difference of which test you use. They're all delivered in the same way. So it's not like you're having to teach the student how to use the system in multiple ways or have to learn it yourself. They're all delivered in the same way. It's just what you do with that data is a little different. So for field testing, again, it's available for students 3 through 12, but it's optional in Illinois. It's very important to understand it's optional in Illinois because there are states that are requiring it. So DLM has messages out that make it sound like it's required by our state, but it's not. But it just gives students as well as teachers an opportunity to provide information back to DLM because they use this field testing to help deliver the assessment and make improvements to the system so that it's right for students and provides that information that teachers need. But it also ensures that we have enough testlets and test items ready for the operational test for the spring 2015. Now this year it's its own testlet where anything the student would do if they did participate in field testing, every item there would be a field test item. These you would not get the data back on. It's just providing that information to DLM. But in future years, it'll be similar to the IA where those items will be embedded within our operational tests. But for the first year as we're going, they have specific field test windows. The next piece is the year-end assessment. This is the part that we're using it for state accountability. Now this grade level is 3 through 8 and 11. Okay, so for our students, the grade levels have not changed, and DLM does do it by grade level. So it's a little different than PARC at the high school. PARC at the high school is by course, but DLM is by grade. Okay, so our shift is still at grade level. So the year in accountability is for ELA and math in grades 3 through 8 and 11. And we have a 6-week test window that runs March 23rd through May 1st. So this is the only piece that's required for those kids at those grade level. Okay, the other pieces are optional, but what it does is it also allows you to get into the system for you and for the student to see how it works, see what works with the student, how you need to deliver things prior to where it counts. So it's nice that you can get in there prior to this year-end accountability and play with it and get a take on how it is because it is a new assessment. So this 6-week window is set for you to create your own schedule like you've done in the past. You know your students' needs, you know the schedule within your own district and classroom that works well, and you deliver in that capability. You have those 6 weeks to do it. Now with DLM, it is an online assessment. It's delivered that way. So however your student accesses it is still how they're going to get it. But there's no paper tests now that are being mailed. Everything will be delivered through the portal, and you go in there to capture the assessment. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. So you do have to have some technology capabilities. So we leave that up to you to schedule your testing within that 6-week window. But it's important that you provide feedback to us because this is the first year of using DLM. It's the first year for us to use it for operational. And we're not sure if 6 weeks is enough or if it's too much. And we're not for sure if we're able to capture your needs. So what we need, we kept the 6-week window from last year. We increased it by 2 weeks because we started to transition the IA to be aligned to the essential elements. So this year the new piece is just the delivery mode. It's just a little bit different. And so we'd like feedback if you find that this is just not working for you. We'd like that feedback so that we can work with DLM. You'll also find that all states have their own test window. Okay, so when you go to DLM for information, you have to clearly state that you're from Illinois because you may find some test windows at other states are only 2 or 3 weeks long and may range in February to March. So it's really important that you stick to what Illinois is doing, but we have a 6-week window. So these assessments are delivered, like I said, in all the same way. So it doesn't make a difference if you're doing instructionally embedded or if you're doing field testing, or you're doing the year-end assessments. They're all delivered in the system in the exact same way. And those tests are designed in what's called a testlet. So to me, a testlet is similar to like an ISAT session. You have some items grouped together in sessions. That's what testlets are. It's items grouped together in a small session. But there's only 3 to 8 items with an engagement activity. Every testlet, regardless of the content area, has an engagement activity to get that student ready to do something testing wise. It's related to the testlet tasks and content that's being assessed, but it's only 3 to 8 items. So the students are going to be delivered multiple testlets to reach all the standards that we're assessing or that you're choosing to assess, but it's each session or testlet is only 3 to 8 tasks, and it's all built off of that learning map. So every task here has a direct line back to a skill or understanding or essential element in that learning map. So when you take a look at it in a finer detail, specifically if you pick the instructionally embedded, then you know specifically which EEs they're testing and you'll know the skills that link back. We have blueprints for our year-end assessment, so you'd be able to see which EEs we're testing, and so you'd get an idea of which testlets are aligned to. So now you have the testlet, that session. Within that testlet are your assessment items. Most items are delivered in a multiple choice format. Now when we talk about multiple choice format, it's not a standard 3-answer option or 4-answer option. It might be a true-false question. It might be that this item was best delivered with 4 options. It might be that it was best delivered with 3 options. Each item is unique based off the skills that they're testing, but most of them are delivered in that multiple choice format. Now, it is delivered through that computer, but the students access it in their mode of communication. There are some limited items that we consider technology enhanced that are like skills of sorting or matching, where on one side it might have a list of statements, and on the right side it has something they're going to match to. When they click on them, it draws a line. Or you might have the sorting where you have 2 buckets on one side and you're going to drag and drop. These items are for students that have more functioning with the computer, and it's based off of their level. So DLM has multiple levels of where students can enter. It's based on their unique needs and abilities. So these technology enhanced items are at the level where students are able to interact with the computer more. The students that are more hands-on or eye gaze, things like that, those tasks more than likely are going to be delivered outside in the system in a different manner to where they can access them as well. So we do have some of those tasks that are delivered outside of the system, which are considered test administrator delivered, where you might present some manipulatives to the student and ask them a question, somewhat similar to maybe some of the science or math items, and you get a response from the student, and you would go to the computer yourself and say, here's what the student said or did, or their reaction. So those are the different types of items that you're going to find within the different testlets, and it's also based off of their ability levels of what the student's able to do within the system. So because of that ability level, they have what's called levels of assessment. DLM has 5 levels. They're all at the same grade level. So if a grade 4 student, there's 5 levels that they could enter in at grade 4. So that's where it gets down to the unique needs of that student. So we capture some information from the teacher, which we'll talk about in further detail in a little bit. But it takes a look at specifically that student's needs and their abilities and their overall functioning at that grade level, and it delivers their assessments at one of those 5 levels. Okay, so that's how it's unique to that student. So no 2 grade 4s students are going to get the exact same testlet, even if they enter in at the same level, because there's other information that's going to guide their testlet. And there's multiple testlets at the levels, but there's 5 levels. So it helps to pick up the students that we consider are pre-intentional, pre-symbolic, but then also those students that meet or possibly could exceed those grade level targets. So, you know, when we take a look at this DLM assessment compared to IA, the IA, we had the one test that had to reach all the kids' levels. The DLM is really dynamic because it reaches down to that unique student's abilities and really captures what they're able to do within those standards. So we're going to take a look at these a little bit more in detail. So when we talk about the 5 levels on the left side, these are the levels: initial precursor, distal precursor, proximal precursor, target, and successor. When we talk about target, that's the EE. So anywhere we talk about target, that's that essential element, okay? But we talked about how they have some that precede and go beyond. So the ones that go beyond is that 1 level successor. So it's that 1 step past the EE. But we have 3 that precede, and that's that initial, distal, and proximal. So when a student's at a grade level, and based on their information, they're going to enter in at one of these 5 levels. From there, The initial is what the teacher's given us, is that behavior, and then a testlet is delivered. But going forward, once the student's done something in the system, they have those responses from that student. They take that behavior to help deliver that next testlet. So the student may have entered in at testlet 1, that first level initial, but based off of that first testlet, their responses, they've determined they really need to be at level 2. The next testlet that that student does will be delivered at that level 2 stage. So it's taking point in time data and providing the next appropriate level of assessment for that student. So when you're using it instructionally embedded, when you go in and you tell us the information, it's going to say, you know what, we think the student's at distal. If you feel that student is not ready for the distal level, you can change it and say, nope, I think it's initial. So you're going to change the level and they're going to start at initial. They do those first testlets that you've chosen the EEs aligned to. If the system finds that, you know what, they've mastered those skills, the next testlet's going to go back to that second level of distal. But if you find that, yep, you are right, that student wasn't able to do all those skills, the next testlet would then continue at that initial level until they've shown that they've mastered those skills to go on to the next testlet. So it's really unique to that student's needs and abilities. Then the year-end assessments are delivered in the same way. So we already have information about the student, so now we have a starting point of where to do those year-end assessments at a level for that student. So here's that graphic that I was talking about. We're going to take a look at an RL 3.3, so it's Reading for Lit, Grade 3, Standard 3. So the essential element is talking about identifying feelings of characters in a story, okay? So now they've taken that skill, so that's the target, so we have that outlined in red, so it's the same exact statement, identifying feelings of characters in a story, but now you can see how it's broken down to each of the levels. So the top one is that initial precursor, that first level. That skill that they're working on is identifying feelings in themselves. Okay, that's a skill or understanding that the student has to be able to do before they can even start figuring out feelings of characters or other people. The next level is that distal, level 2, is identifying feeling words. So now just identifying the feeling, now they're trying to tie it to that text. What is that word that that feeling is capturing? Level 3 is proximal. Well, now they're starting to identify feelings in characters in familiar stories. So stories that they already have learned, stories that you use in your classroom on a day-to-day basis, things that you've talked about years or used for over years. Now you're looking at familiar stories. You're talking about it there. Then you get to the target where it's not with the familiar story. So now it's something new, and now they're having to apply those skills and identify characteristics, feelings in that. And then if they get that EE, they're going to go one step beyond that successor, and it would be, can they relate to characters' feelings or desires from a story? So it's now not just identifying, it's now can they relate to it? So you can see how everything there, out of these 5, they all relate back to that character feeling, but at each level, it's just a little bit different based on those needs or abilities within each of those levels. So when a student enters one of those testlets at a level, it's still aligned to their grade level standard, and they're going to work their way through the levels, but now it gives you that information about where their current instructional level is and where you need to go next. It just assists with that formative information. You guys have any questions about this graphic? Now DLM does have a few more of these. They have one for math. It was a lot more in depth because there's a lot more skills that are embedded within one EE, but they do have them out there on their website. So after you do things in the system and we do the year end, some of the reports that you can see we're going to take a look at. So they're still sample because they're going through the states right now to kind of get them finalized. But here's one report that they call like the individual student progress report that you'd be able to print off within the system. So on the left side it talks about the instructional target, so that's your EE. So this one's a grade 3 reading. So it's RL 3.1, 3.2, so it's reading for lit, grade 3 standards. So it tells you that instructional target, that EE. Then it talks about the 5 levels. So after that last slide, you could see each skill at each level. So this one's breaking it down. For each of these EEs, here's the skill at each of those levels. But now it's giving us more information. It's not just telling us what those skills are, but now it's telling us that student's progress. So everything in green is skills that they've mastered. that we've been able, after they've assessed in the system, we've been able to tell that they've mastered. So you can see that they entered in at level 1, they've mastered level 1 for all 4 standards, and they've moved on to level 2. What's in yellow shows their current level of instruction. So for 3 of the standards, they're still at level 2, but for 1, they've mastered that already, and they've moved on. So we're gonna take a look at that one. That's RL 3.3, so it's Reading for Lit, grade 3, standard 3, and it's that identifying feelings. So you can see that that student started at that initial precursor, but they've mastered level 1, they've mastered level 2, so now they're working on that identifying feelings and characters in familiar stories. So they're working their way towards that essential element. So this one breaks it down to that level of detail that you can see those instructional skills of where you need to go next and what they've already done in the system. Okay, another report, what they call a growth profile. It takes that same data in the system, but presents it in a different way. And DLM has done this because of feedback from educators that have used the system in the past for field testing have showed different needs. We know students make progression at different paces. We know some students may never show that they have progress for the year, but they've maintained. We have some students that make progress and we can clearly see it. So they've delivered many reports so that you use what report works for you. They're all going to be available. And they're always looking for suggestions if there's something they haven't created that would work for you. But this is another type of report, it uses that same data. But now it's taking a look at the essential elements as a whole. So this student is a grade 3 ELA again. They've been working on 17 essential elements throughout the year. So now they can take a look at it. Based on her progress, this student's expected to show growth in 11 of the 17. Okay, so if you printed it off now and they've done stuff in the system, they've worked on 17 EEs, and based on their responses on those testlets, their expected growth is on 11 of the 17. And then from there, they break it down into one of the growth categories, and there are going to be 5 instead of 4 this year. So we're aligning it with Park as well. There will be 5. So it tells you what growth category right now that they're falling into. But then it does a comparison. So since DLM is a consortium, we're made up of those 19 states, now you're not just going to get data based off of your district and our state, but you're also going to get it in comparison as a whole, the rest of the nation, the rest of the states that are a part of DLM at that grade level and content area. So you get that data in the middle there. And then at the bottom, it aligns it to those conceptual areas that we talked about. So it tells you how many of those essential elements fall within each conceptual area and how many they've met or exceeded growth on. So if we looked at the top one, it's determining critical elements of text. There's 8 essential elements of the 17 that fit into this conceptual area, and they have met or exceeded growth in 5 of them. So it just takes that data and gives it to you in just a little bit different way, okay? Now we have another one. That's a performance profile. Okay, same data, but now they're breaking it down to the skill level within each of the EEs. So this is a grade 8 math. So this student's been working on 14 EEs, and within those 14 EEs, the learning map has mapped 70 skills. Okay, so right now, this student has mastered 41 of those 70 skills within those EEs. So it breaks it down to that skill level, what's in that learning map. And over time, that this person's fell into one of those performance categories. And then it does that same percentage in the middle. And then at the bottom, it looks at the skill level now aligned to that conceptual area. So the middle one of the middle ones says compare, compose, and decompose numbers. There's 5 skills within it, and that student's mastered 4 of the 5. So now you can tell specifically down to that conceptual area, if you're looking at a specific piece of information, how many skills that they've been able to do. You're not just looking at that big standard. This is where it breaks it down to those smaller concepts. You can take a look at it and look at the report that way. A second piece to this is more of a narrative that will print out after you do that says Susie's interested in shared reading, She understands actions that are part of routines familiar to her. She understands that words have meanings that relate to people and objects around her, and she can identify characters' feelings and illustrations in the familiar text. So it breaks it down to more of a narrative of what they've seen her respond to in the system, and based on those instructional goals, they provide a narrative of what she's able to do. And so this is just tacked on to some of those reports. So it's just a different way to look at that data. All right, so we keep talking about the systems. There's two systems. So there's an educator system and there's the student system. And it's important to know that the DLM systems are different than the PARC systems. Okay, DLM is its own vendor and PARC is going through Pearson. So when we talk about the DLM systems, we mainly talk about KITE. KITE client is what delivers those assessments. Okay, or delivers them to the teacher so that the teacher can access them for the student. So KITE client is something that does have to be loaded on the computers that the students will use or what you'll use. So we have a manual out there that's called the Technical Liaison Manual. And in there it walks you through of where to get the downloadable software, if you're using it on an iPad, where to go for the app, and so on. So you'll have to load this prior to any testing. That's prior to any field testing, any instructionally embedded tests, any year-end tests. This is the software that's going to deliver your tests. So like I said, we don't have any of those paper copies anymore. You're going to get it through the system. The system for educators is called Educator Portal. Okay, now this one is just a web address. This web address is educator.cete.us. It's educator.cete.us. Okay, by now we like to say educators should have their username and password, but we find that many haven't. So on September 11th, and prior to that, we messaged to superintendents that they would be receiving a login for both DLM and PARC. From there, we trained them on creating their test coordinator so that their test coordinators could go in and then create their teacher accounts. So I'd like to just get a show of hands. How many coordinators have their account? A couple, all right, a few. All right, how many teachers have an account? Okay, so if you are an educator that haven't got a count yet, if you're a teacher, you need to go back to your test coordinator and see if they've gotten their account so they can get you set up. And if you're a test coordinator, you need to reach out to your superintendent. So because DLM is its vendor and it's not the same vendor we use for IAA, this was our starting point of capturing a contact. ISBE has a system that's called EPS. It's the Entity Profile System that's required by districts to be updated on a yearly basis. And typically the contact that is put in there is the district superintendent, or it could be a co-op or special ed director or someone like that. So that's where that contact first went to on September 11th. Okay, they have accounts. Okay, it was created and it's activated. So if you find when you go back to talk to them and they say, well, I don't know what that is, all they need to do is go to that website I just gave you and click on Forgot Password. Their username is their email address. Okay, so they'll just type in their email address and click Submit. It'll send them a new email to get logged in. Okay. From there, we have PDFs on our ISBE site to walk them through how to create a test coordinator. And then we have a PDF out there to walk test coordinators through how to create teacher accounts. When you get your account, it'll instantly send an email to you from KITE, so you'll know that you're getting this email. Okay, so that's your starting point. Is coordinators, you need to go to your superintendent, and teachers, you need to go to your test coordinator. But this system is going to deliver a lot of things to educators. So it's where we're going to manage that student data. It's where we're going to access the professional development that's required, some of those trainings. It's going to be the personal learning profile that we're going to learn about here in a little bit. And it's where you're going to retrieve those reports about your students. So after they do testing, they're going to put them in here. Educator Portal is also going to give you the student's username and password for the KITE. Okay, so once those students are rostered to you, this is your portal to get all that information. So it's important that you get access. Now, did anyone in here participate in the field test in the spring? Okay, if you did, DLM had suggested data stewards and tech liaisons needed an account. For Illinois, that is not necessary. Their tasks are done outside of the system, so it's not necessary that they have accounts, unless they are going to assist you with rostering your students. That would be the only thing that they would need an account for. If not, you do not need to create them. Okay, so if you're a coordinator, we're going to go through some tasks here that you need to start working on if you haven't done so already. And you're not late. So if you haven't got them, you're not late. Your time schedule is based on what you're going to do in the system. So if you're wanting to use the instructionally embedded test or you're wanting to use field testing, you'd want to start doing these tasks now. If you're only going to use it for the year end, you've got some time to work on these. But the first task as a coordinator is getting these accounts created for your teachers, and if you have any paraprofessionals that you wish to get in the system to do training. So Illinois doesn't require paraprofessionals that work with students to go through it because they can't do the assessment. Okay, it's similar to your IA requirements. They can be in the room and assist that student during delivery of the assessment. They can even deliver the assessment. But if the student has to be able to respond to the task, or if not, and it's a teacher-delivered task, your certified educator has to input that answer into the computer. But if you're going to have that paraprofessional deliver the test or assist that student, because that's what's typical in the classroom, it may be beneficial that they understand the DLM system and all of its components. So we leave that up to the districts to decide if they're going to do that. So if they're going to create their teachers and paraprofessionals, the teachers need to be given the teacher role. When we talk about teachers, typically it's a teacher that's going to be giving the assessment, but it's any test administrator. So if you have your speech path that's going to assist, it's a certified educator. So any certified educator needs to be given that teacher role. If they're just a paraprofessional, then they need to be given what's a PD user. That gives them only access to that professional development. They can't do anything else in the system. They can't retrieve any reports. They can't be assigned students. And that's because they're not that certified educator that's in charge of that student. But it gives them access to that training that the teacher would go through. When you give the teacher role, or that educator that's going to be doing the test administration, that required training is automatically delivered to them with that role. Okay, so these are the roles that you would want to give them. Once you have them created, the next step is the pre-ID file and SIS. Now you may not be the one directly in charge of your pre-ID file, but you're probably the one that they turn to get the accurate information from the student IEPs. So this year, the pre-ID file, we have a DLM pre-ID file that's separate from the PARC pre-ID file. In the past, we had one file because the data layout was very similar. This year, it's different. So when districts go in, and it was made available last Friday, they would go in and they would have a PARC pre-ID and a DLM pre-ID. Today, we're going to start pulling the DLM file. So any student that's going to be captured, we're going to start loading into Educator Portal. So all student data is going to come from the pre-ID file and SIS. So you're going to work on your student data through SIS. Okay, that's not necessarily the message you're going to hear from DLM, because other states are going to load directly into Educator Portal. It's very important that you work through SIS, because SIS is going to override any information you do in Educator Portal. So you need to work with your SIS folks to do your student uploads through SIS. So we're pulling students in grades 3 through 12, okay, which is a little different than the past. And we're pulling them so that if you wanted to use the field testing or instructionally embedded assessments, the students are loaded then in the Educator Portal. Just because they're in Educator Portal doesn't mean you have to do those. Okay, you just have to do that required year end for 3 through 8 and 11. It's just that's the only way to get the students in the portal so that you have the availability of participating if you wish. So the way the file this year is being derived is similar to the past experience. Their last test to be taken, if it was IA, they're automatically defaulted to IA this year. So now we're going to default them to DLM. Grade 3 students, because they didn't take a test last year in 2nd grade, are defaulted to PARC. So it's important that you go in and check your grade 3 students. Any student that's eligible to be DLM, that you flip their record to say DLM so that they get captured in the file. Now, like I said, today we're going to start pulling it, and we're going to pull it every Friday to accommodate any changes in the system. Okay, it's important that if you're a serving location for the school, you must work with the home district. Home districts have always been the ones responsible for their pre-ID files. So it's their responsibility to get that data in there, to get it accurate, so that when we pull it, that's where the student will show up in that serving location. So if they are being served, if you're a serving location, you need to work with that home district to make sure you're listed as testing. Yep.
In the past, we've had all the test booklets centrally located and then I disperse out to our co-op programs.
Right.
And so we did the testing school as the central location. Is that going to affect anything since it's web-based?
So for testing school, is that code a school code or is it district code? So all you'd have to do is make sure when you tie your teachers, they have to be tied to a school, that you have the students tied to the same school you have your teacher tied to in Educator Portal. Yes. Since there isn't any materials, you don't have to worry about them being delivered anyway, but you have to make sure that the student school is the same school that you have that teacher tied to so that you can connect them. Okay? So when we list the testing school, when you list the testing school, regardless if it's the home district school or it's the school where they're being served, whatever teacher is going to be tied to that student, they have to have the same school listed. Okay? If we need to talk about it in more detail later, we can. We have some cases with co-ops and things like that that they have other systems set up that we may have to work with you specifically. I can assist you. It's run the same way the IA file has. Whatever's listed as testing is where that student's going to populate in Educator Portal. Okay, so let's say the home district says, yep, I've coded them to you. We load that file, you have read-only access, and you don't see that student. You know they've not coded them to you. Okay, so you still have that same read-only access. If you log into Educator Portal and that student's missing, you know they've not coded you as serving because they would populate into that testing location. So that's why we're pulling it every Friday, and we'll load it over the weekend so that following Monday, you'll be able to go into Educator Portal and see any changes to students or any additions to students. We're going to pull it through the end of February. Then starting, I want to say it's February 21st, we're going to pull it nightly. It's just before testing. We know we have a lot of mobility and students may move and come in, so we want to be able to capture that testing population, so we're going to pull it nightly. So you can continue to update this pre-ID file for DLM ongoing, okay, so we can capture those students. Okay, your third task as a coordinator is once we start loading those students, you're going to have to roster them. Same task as you had to do for IA, put them in a teacher's classroom. DLM calls it rostering. You have to roster them for ELA and you have to roster them for math. Okay, so the only difference is now you're going to have to roster that student into 2 classrooms. Okay, so it may be the same teacher that teaches both ELA and math, but now you have to create an ELA classroom for that student and a math classroom. Okay, so you're going to have to roster them for each content area. This is just a screenshot of what's in Educator Portal. So you can see the roster name would be, Jessica's math classroom. It would have my number, my first name, last name, and then content area would be mathematics. So I would know that that's my mathematics class. Under there, if I was the ELA teacher, you'd see another record for my ELA class. So when you click on those, all your students populate and it's a check next to the student name to enroll them in that class. We're working on a guidance document to assist you through those steps. That will be made available next week on our websites, and we'll show you those links here in a little bit. So students are going to be pulled from SIS. They'll be loaded into Educator Portal. Once they're loaded, then you can begin rostering. Okay? You have to roster students in order for teachers to do some of their tasks prior to testing. So it's important that once you see students are loaded that you get them rostered, because teachers aren't going to be able to do anything in the system till they get their tasks done, and it's all dependent on them getting pulled into Educator Portal and getting assigned to that teacher. Okay, so like I said, next week you can start doing the rostering. Okay, so teachers, your first step, your first task is DLM requires training. They have 7 modules that they require to talk about the system, how it works, and things like that. They say total testing time is just under 4 hours. There's 2 formats that you can deliver it in. Illinois does not require one way. You can do a facilitated or self-directed. A facilitated would be bringing a group together like this, using the facilitated resources and doing the training together. Self-directed would be a one-on-one individual doing the training on their own. You choose how you're going to deliver this training. In the end, in April and May, Illinois will receive a file from DLM that shows all educators that have gone through the training, and we will issue CPDUs. Okay, but it's not going to be until the end of the test window. So you will get credit for these, but there's overview of the DLM system. So it's going to talk some of what we talked today, but go into more detail. Test security. It's going to talk about accessibility for all students, how those students can access the tests, how the assessments work, how to prepare for the tests, and then talk about the two types of tests, those computer delivered or that teacher administered. Okay. We do have a link of materials that's called the facilitated page. I recommend that you provide everyone that's got to go through this training that facilitated page, whether or not they're doing it facilitated or not. Because there's resources such as the PowerPoint and this transcript. And there's other resources that are made available for them if you go to that link. It is delivered in Educator Portal. Okay, so that's where they're capturing whether or not they get through the training. Each module has a quiz. I don't think there's any more than 5 or 6 questions. Typically it's only 2 or 3. They do have to pass each quiz so that they show that they have an understanding of the system. But they can take the quizzes multiple times if they, for some reason, don't pass them. But that's why it's important that you give them those resources that they can use to assist versus just having the module presentation. So that's your first task, is going through the training so that you understand the system.
Once you start this 4-hour training, can you come back to it, or do you have to complete all?
No, so it's set up by mini modules. So if you start one module, you just want to get through the one module and you can come back to it. So they just said if you sat down to do all 7, it would take just under 4 hours. So what we're finding are some people have an early out that they have to do as an institute day. They're bringing them together, getting through a couple of them to get them started and giving them the materials, and then they're saying, okay, we need you to finish the rest. You know, you might have a 20-minute break time that you can get your 3rd module in, things like that. We have others that are saying, you know what, here's the materials. We need you to get it done. It's left up to your district to decide how you're delivering that material to the educators that are delivering the assessment. It is required for anyone that's a test administrator, okay? So if they're going to be the test administrator giving that assessment, they have to go through it. Otherwise, DLM will not assign tests to that kid that's tied to that teacher. Okay, so it's important that they get through it. So it's better to start now than later. These do have to be done prior to any testing in the system. So if you're wanting to use it for field testing or instructionally embedded, you'd have to have this done by then. If you're just using it for the year end, you need to have it done by that date. So your schedule's kind of derived based off of what you're going to use the system for.
Okay, for the CPDUs, okay, like a bunch of us have already done the testing, so that is the training, is that going to be dated October when we did it, but then we're not going to get the CPDUs until May, because then we're not going to be able to use those CPDUs because we'll be past the 60 days to report it to the state.
So we probably won't have the issue date until that May date when we issue them.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've asked DLM just to give us a file of educators that have completed it and not when they've completed it, just that they've completed it. So we'll make sure that we meet all those guidelines. So the second task for teachers, so once you know the system and you've gone through your training, this is the important piece that you have to have your students rostered to you. So what they call the personal learning profile is made up of the PMP, the personal needs preferences profile, and the first contact survey. Now it's important to know that if you are familiar with PARC has a PMP. It is not the same exact thing as DLM's PMP. The way we capture the PMP information is not the same. Okay, it's very different. DLM's PMP is captured directly in Educator Portal. PARC PMP is captured through the SIS pre-ID file. Okay, so for DLM students, you're going to enter in PMP information that covers display enhancements, their language and braille, auditory, and environment supports, and any other supports that they may need. The first contact survey is going to have you provide information on their sensory and motor characteristics. It's going to ask you about the student's computer access, their communication. It's going to talk about their academic levels and their attention. This is what the system's going to use to help deliver that first testlet at a level, at one of those 5 levels. Okay, so it's capturing what type of computer access that student really has. If they're higher level with the computer, they might be delivered testlets where they're able to do that interactive, where their assistive technology might work with the computer and they're able to do that, or they're able to work on a touch screen and use an iPad. So it's asking them their mode of communication and their access level to the computer, and it's taking that in consideration when it delivers a testlet. So if you would tell us that a student has absolutely no computer access and they're getting everything delivered outside of the system because they're eye gazing, your testlets are going to be delivered to where it's more than likely a task you're going to deliver outside with manipulatives, and you're going to take that student's response and tell us what they said or if they had no response. Okay, so it's taking their ability levels and delivering it what's appropriate for them.
Are they timed? I know some parts it's time.
So it's only timed in a sense that if it goes dormant for a long period of time, it's going to tell you that it's going to sign itself out, and you can just tell it that you're still working. But it's not timed in that you have 50 minutes to get a testlet done. What we do suggest though is each testlet, like we said, is only 3 to 8 tasks that you try to schedule based off of your students' needs. So that's why it's important that you get in the system and either use some of the sample tasks, or you go through the field testing or instructional embedded so you get an idea for that student. But you try to get a testlet done when you start it. Because what will happen, so let's say the testlet you have for your students 4 tasks. If you get through 3 and you need to take a break, you take a break. The system can sit dormant for, I think it's 30 minutes before it comes back and starts to tell you that it's going to log out. My understanding is if you come back and start doing something, it's picked up that it's not dormant anymore. If you still need to continue that break, you can. Okay? It's just that after, I think it's at 28 minutes, it starts to remind you. The test administration manual will talk more in detail on that. But you do have that to where you have that break. But what's important is that you at least go back and finish that one last task in that testlet. Because if you would exit without saving, the next time you log back in, you're going to have to go through that entire testlet again to capture it. Okay, so it's important that you can take those breaks and use the entire day to get through that testlet, but it's important that you at least get through that testlet when you do deliver it. Now you create your student schedule. So if they have 3 math testlets, you have the entire 6 weeks to get through those 3 testlets. It's just that you want to try to get through that testlet the day that you start it. Okay, so you create that student schedule. But they're using this first contact to deliver which level of the student to enter the system in. And then they take that in addition to the responses on those testlets to know what level to continue to deliver the assessments. So it's important that the teachers have time to fill this out. DLM has said that it takes about 15 minutes a student. Okay, but what we're going to do is we're capturing this data on a yearly basis, and as we load students, we're going to reconnect it. So if you had any students who participated in the field test this last year, we're automatically going to pull that data in, and the teacher just has to review it and make any updates to it. And then next year, we're going to capture that at the end of the testing window and pull it back in, so that it's not every year you're having to go in and complete it all. That at some point, it's just going to be that you're reviewing it on a yearly basis or throughout, because you can change this as often as the student's needs change. Okay, you may find that you picked display enhancement and you initially said, I always had large print, I've been blowing it up, so I picked 5 times. And you find that, you know what? I was going to do it on an iPad, but I have a smart board. I'm going to do it on the smart board instead. And 5 times its size is just way too big. You would want to go back into the PMP and say, nope, I don't need display enhancement. The next time you deliver that assessment, you can remove it immediately and reload that assessment. It would be removed. So these can be changed based on your students' needs and abilities. But in order for any testlet to be even delivered at once, the first time, these have to be completed and submitted. But you fix it and update it as students' needs change, okay? And so this is where you're going to capture it. But at the end of that testing window, that year ends, DLM is going to capture what's in the system there, and then when we load the file next year, we're going to pull that in, so teachers just have to review it each year and resubmit it. So it's not that you're going to have to complete this. So if you find a student that already has data, it's because they participated in our field test, and we pulled that, and you just need to review it and make any changes necessary for the student this year. This is completed in Educator Portal. So once the coordinator has rostered that student to you, you have access to this. So when you look at your classroom, you'll see all your students listed. On the far right side are 2 columns. One column is for the PMP, one column is for first contact survey. Tests cannot be assigned until both of these are complete. okay? So it's important that you get them filled out and that you submit them. If you've completed them and you don't submit them to the system, it doesn't have this information, okay? But coordinators, you can monitor this, okay? When you look at your teacher and student accounts in Educator Portal, you can see if they've been able to complete these or not. But if one of them is not completed, you know that's what the holdup is on their tests.
Is there a deadline for submission?
No. So the deadline is what drives your assessment. So if you want to do instructionally embedded, you want to get it done, DLM says it takes about a 24-hour period before a test that can be delivered. So if you're wanting to use instructionally embedded, we have a window that just opened and runs through December 15th. So if you're wanting to test in there, as soon as you get it done, about 24 hours later, a testlet would be delivered for that student. So for your year-end assessment, where it's required, your hope is that you get it done prior to your testing window, so that when the testing window opens, testlets have been delivered, that you're not waiting on this information so that tests can be assigned. Because again, like we said, it's not just an Illinois test, it's 19 states. So the system is working for all 19 states. Okay, so now I'm going to hand this over to Laura to kind of talk about our accessibility features and accommodations. And so you did get a handout that's separate from the PowerPoint. She's going to just kind of reference it, and this is just a screenshot of that. Oh.
Okay, so my name is Laura Quimby, and I'm with the Special Education Division of Springfield office. And in my spare time, I do assessments, but in my main job, I do focus monitoring. So I got the pleasure of taking over assessments from a former focus monitor. So this is what I have created for you guys to use for your accommodation pages and your assessment pages. So when we talk about the accessibility features for DLM, the good thing about the accessibility features for them is that you can change them at any point in time during the entire assessment. So if you find that the magnification doesn't work for them and you want to do something different, you can change it right after they finish that one testlet and then try something different. The reason for the assessment page for this, to show display enhancement, language and braille, and audio environment supports for those three main categories as your accessibility feature, is that they can constantly change at any point in time. So you wouldn't have to go back to the IEP meeting and recreate an IEP to make those changes every time. So for this reason, if you put this, we require you now to use this checklist for your IEPs. So we want you to start using this. You check it, you attach it to your IEPs. And as long as you have one area of those checked within the bigger construct of display enhancements, audio and visual, and language and braille, you're covered under your accessibility and accommodations features, because those are what the main three categories are for accommodations. If you input it into your IEP program, if you do a computer-based IEP program, and you go to input this into it and you just have your categories as display enhancement, language and braille, or audio and visual, please explain to the parents that these are what's covered under those three categories, okay? So we try to make it very simple for you because it is very complicated, because this is just one piece of the assessments and then you have PARC. So with this, when you go in and you decide for a team, or you go in and make those changes for those students, you really wouldn't have to make a lot of changes. If you already have IEPs written, as long as they closely align to what's already here, so if you have large print, or if you have text to speech, or the test is going to be read to them, that is all covered as much as possible into the accommodations feature. So there's not a lot of rewriting or amending IEPs for this upcoming assessment. We also have 3 accommodations. Is that included in that? Okay.
No.
Okay, so we also have 3 accommodations outside of the system, which is the human read aloud, the signed text, and teacher interest responses. And then we also have other team-defined accommodation. There are those accommodations that students will need that is not covered under those accessibility features and those accommodations. So if there is something that you're using currently with a student that is not available as far as what we have printed for you, you can put that under team defined, and that will cover you for your student for their unique needs. Whatever, as long as it doesn't negate the test or invalidate the test, it's perfectly okay to use. Other than that, that's pretty much it. Does anyone have questions on that particular, yeah.
Could you give an example of that, a team defined?
A team defined.
Give me a good one.
You want me to use the kid with the,
No.
oh.
So the team defined, what we talk about, ones that don't negate would be like hand over hand. Hand over hand might be an appropriate instructional accommodation that you use, but for an assessment, hand over hand would be that teacher or paraprofessional providing that answer, not that student specifically. A team defined might be, we have this one for Park, but the student would need paper, they tear paper for anxiety. It has nothing to do with the assessment. It would be delivered something from the classroom perspective that you would write specifically in there that the student would need to tear paper. Or if they have a stress ball, things like that. Once you get into that P&P, most of what we've had in the past as accommodations are delivered right there. So you'll kind of start to see what ones you might have listed as what we called the other for IA. But it's just mainly the purposes that they don't negate the purpose of the assessment. And right now, the only one we could come up with was hand over hand. So you just want to document it and be specific to what it is. You just can't say team defined. You need to write it out with what you're using.
Any other questions? You guys are easy. Like, I like that.
So the importance is just to know that the terminology might be changing, such as what used to be listed as accommodations. The terminology now might be accessibility features, and that's both with DLM and Park. And so you just want to make sure parents have that understanding that that terminology is different, and that we may have had 15 accommodations that we documented in the past, and now we're only having to capture so many because some of them are embedded within the platform for DLM. And then so you have that chart. It kind of gives you a guidance document as well, but if you have further questions after this, you would just contact Laura and we'll give her her information here in a little bit. So the testing windows. So this is what drives when you need to get your tasks done. So like we said, we have the optional field testing and instructionally embedded assessments. Those windows, one just opened on November 10th and runs through December 19th. And then it opens back up January 5th through March 6th. So as we continue to load the students from the SIS file, they'll be in there to where if you wanted to participate, you could. Now when we talk about participation, it doesn't mean a whole district, doesn't mean the whole class, it doesn't mean the every teacher. One teacher could try it out with one student for one content area. It's whatever you want to do, okay? There's no requirements or minimum if you choose to do it. But the students are in there ready to go in case you want to do it. Now with field testing, DLM has no easy way of capturing if one teacher wants to do it and another one doesn't. So once students are loaded, they're automatically going to be assigned field testing. You'll see testlets that'll have FT for field testing. If you do not wish to participate in field testing, you just don't deliver those testlets. Okay, and then DLM will know that there's no responses. They don't take that as data. But if you want to participate, they're the ones listed as FT. If you're doing instructionally embedded, depending on what EEs you choose, you'll see those EE numbers within the title of that testlet, so that you would know which testlets that you would be delivered during that window. And then the year-end dates again that are required for 3 through 8 and 11 are March 23rd through May 1st. So these are the dates that you're going to want to use to drive what you do in the system. So if you're going to participate in one of those earlier windows, you need to get your teachers in the system so they can get the students rostered and that they can go in and do that PMP and first contact. But if you're only going to be using it for that March 23rd date, you've got some time to do that, but you still wouldn't want to wait until that last minute prior to testing. Okay, so we have a lot of resources available, and we have 2 sites at the bottom. The top one is the dynamiclearningmaps.org, Illinois. So the DLM has their own site, but then they have state-specific pages. So if you type in Illinois, you'll go straight to our site and get all the materials and resources that are specific to Illinois. And so you'll find, if you start to wonder at other state sites, they might have other information that just isn't needed for Illinois. And the one I like to reference because I get called on it all the time is the Data Steward Manual. Okay, we do not have a Data Steward Manual, because the Data Steward Manual talks about loading data into Educator Portal that you would be doing it. And we're running everything through SIS. We already have a state data system, and some of the states that are a part of DLM do not. And it's all done at a local level. So you want to make sure that you stay specifically to our state page. So some of the materials you'll find on there is the accessibility manual. So it'll go in more detail about those accessibility features and accommodations that Laura talked about, and it'll go through that PMP and that first contact in more detail. We have a manual called Assessment Coordinator Manual. It'll talk about the steps that you need to take. It kind of gives you a checklist at the beginning. It'll walk you through rostering students to an extent. And then we'll have that supplement guide. We have the Tech Liaison Manual. That's for whoever's going to work on loading that Kite client on your computers. So if it's not a tech person, it's going to be you. That's the manual that's going to show you how to access that Kite client, where to get the software, which format you need based off of the computer types that you're using, and so on. So you'd want to reference that one. The next one is the Test Administration Manual. So this one's for any educator that's going to be a test administrator. They would want to make sure they go through this. Some of the training information does tell them to refer to the Test Administration Manual for more information. So it's going to walk them through more detail about the assessment, some of that, giving the breaks during the test, things like that. So you want to reference that one. There's a guide to that required training. So it'll talk about the two processes, the self-directed or the facilitated, and how to access those. Then underneath that's that facilitated training page. That gives you the resources for that required training. Okay, so you can go click there and get all those materials. The one that we'll be posting next week is that guide to rostering students, so that one's coming. And then what they have posted is a guide to practice activities and release testlets. So if you choose that for right now, you know what, you just don't want to use the system until it's required, but you want to get your hands on it just to take a look. In this guide of practice activities and release testlets, there's demo student usernames and passwords, where you could use those demo students and see some of the accessibility features and log in to the DLM system and look at what a testlet looks like based off of that student. Like, it'll give you some information that this student's at one of this level of those 5. These are the accessibility features and accommodations this student has. So then when you log in, you can see what it looks like. You can interact with those testlets. So if you wanted to interact or have your students interact, you could do that. But you wouldn't have to then actually go in and deliver an instructionally embedded or field testing. So you have a way of accessing the test without actually doing one of those assessments. All these resources are delivered on that DLM page, that Dynamic Learning Map.Illinois, that page. You want to go there, okay? Now what's on our ISBE site for DLM is more policy-specific stuff for Illinois. Okay, we haven't captured all these other resources there, because if we did, we'd link you right back to the DLM page so that we keep the same link. So it's important that you start using that Dynamic Learning Map site. Now when you go to that site, you can choose to sort by role. Okay, or if you didn't choose a role, it's going to list every document we've ever posted on there. Okay, they're in alphabetical order. But if you're a test coordinator and that's all you want to see, you click on your role for assessment coordinator, and it's only going to give you materials that are pertinent to your role. If you're a tech coordinator, it's only going to give you the materials that you need. Okay, so they have it set up to where you can sort by your role. So as we're nearing the end of our actual presentation, and we'll get to some questions, we like to always give you our contact information. So we have an assessment email, assessment@isbe.net. Now as we're doing trainings and stuff, we're out of the office, we ask that you send an email to that. We have a couple people who check it on a daily basis, and they send the emails out to the other consultants that are in the office to get you your answers right away. So if you need an answer right away, you send it to that assessment email instead of us personally, and then you can get that response. And you've also got our phone number up there. But we've given you our specific emails so that if you have questions that aren't dire need, you could always email us. But we have what's called an assessment listserv. This listserv we send out as soon as we get information finalized by state assessments, not just DLM and Park, but all of our state assessments, or information that we need to get out to the field. We send it through this assessment listserv. We have anywhere from parents all the way up to superintendents and college folks that are a part of our listserv. It doesn't make a difference who it is. If you want to receive this information in a timely fashion, then you join our assessment listserv. And we've given you the instructions there. You just send a blank email to that assessment email address, and put subscribe in that subject and we'll get you enrolled. We try to send only one message out a week and summarize all the information and tell you specifically where you can find that information on our websites. So like we're getting ready to send one out that's going to talk about the park accessibility manual and the DLM manuals. We'll give you the link embedded within that email. So it's really where we get that information out timely, because some of it's not information that we need to post on our superintendent weekly message, but it's important that you guys get this information, the ones that actually need it. So this would be a way to get that information right away. But DLM also has a help desk like we've had in the past with our other tests. So you can contact DLM. Right now I think their hours are from 7 to 7, but they can help with issues such as testing environment, test administration, user account issues, things with the online testing, anything. The systems are theirs. Educator Portal, Kite, and the entire test system was built all by DLM. States have had input along the way, but they've really been the ones that have created it, so they can assist with any questions. It's just important that if you do call them that you reference that you're from Illinois, so that they can make sure that they follow the policies and procedures that Illinois has set in place. But you can email them or you can give them a call. And so that's all we have for our presentation. Now we know you probably have a lot of questions. Typically we have quite a few questions and we don't get done in time. So please ask now while we're here. Nope, that's not a question for me. You want to hand out?
Wheelchair bound, visually impaired.
Right.
I can't wrap my hand. Can you paint me a picture of what?
So how do they access stuff in the classroom? Using manipulative things that they can, are they able to?
Hand, almost everything is hand.
Okay, so when it comes to assessment, we know hand over hand is not appropriate. So you would want to be working on modes of communication in the classroom to establish another way of communicating than just hand over hand. So whether it's that you're using manipulatives and they're able to touch things like that. Most of their tasks sound like they're going to be delivered outside of the system. So their visual might be tactile, so where they're not able to visually see it because they have that visual impairment. I would also have you contact DLM. They've had field testing from all 19 states and a wide range of students, and they've told us they have never been able to find a student that hasn't been able to access the assessment. And so since they've really been a part of how those items are created and how they're embedded with the system, they would be able to specifically help you how that one student's going to be able to access it. But it all starts with that mode of communication, what you're using in the classroom. So if it is hand over hand, how do you get data on that student if you're always doing hand over hand? So I would start there. So if the teacher, whatever mode they're doing to try to get data on that student, that would be a starting point to see if the system works to deliver it in that way. Right?
I did. I've started taking the test modules, and the last couple of days I haven't been able, I get in, but it won't the
Video. Okay, so DLM has suggested that you need to use Firefox to do anything when it comes to DLM. The modules, Educator Portal, that you need to go through Firefox. They just did a recent update and it's causing like Google Chrome and things like that not to play, or for it to cut in and out, or you to only see part of the screen. So try Firefox. If that still doesn't work, then contact DLM directly. I know the last couple weeks they've been doing a lot to the system and it's just been bombarded with stuff, but I would say that it's probably Firefox, the browser. Yep. Yes. Yep. So when you load the student platform, it still will access the internet. But what it does is it blocks out access to everything else. So they can't access the internet to look for answers or things like that. They do have certain apps that if students are using those assistive technology devices and apps that they need to communicate, that they have guidance on it and how you can access this. But what it does, it's same with Park for TestNav. It blocks their access out of everything else, so they can't accidentally get out of test and get into something else. All they would have access to is that test at that time. So if you go to that facilitated link, they'll have a recording right there. You can play from there. But after the fact, whether you want to do it after each module or you want to say after all 7, the teacher has to go into Educator Portal to take the quiz, because the system's going to capture the quiz. It's okay if they've watched the video outside of Educator Portal, but they have to take the quiz in Educator Portal. So if you want to sit together as a group, if after each module you want them to log into Educator Portal to take the quiz, then you can, or you can have them do it after you get through the 7 with using those materials. It's important that you go to the materials because the quiz is part of those materials. So if you're doing it facilitated, you could use the hard copy quiz and they could just transfer their answers into the portal. But you do have to capture the quiz in the portal. Doesn't matter if they watch the video or not. I think one of the questions is, did you receive this as facilitated or self-directed? So it's going to capture whether or not you watched the video or not.
But we can print the hard copy
Yeah.
and then they can go back.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? You guys are going to get out early. Well, we will be here because we are a part of the park training. So if you have individual questions that you want to ask us, please do so. But thank you very much for having us.